Picture this. You're a college student halfway through your degree, and you spent the last 2 years grinding out your exams and working part-time jobs. You may have even taken out some student loans to help pay for your tuition. But it was all worth it, because in the end, college was your golden ticket to a better life. But then one day, you get a surprise email. Your school is closing down, and they're giving you just 7 days notice. And now you're left scrambling. Will your credits transfer over to a new school? Does all that tuition that you paid get refunded? And how about your student loans? Will they be forgiven? Your entire world just got turned upside down, and you're just one student out of thousands. Because at one point in 2024, colleges were closing at a rate of 1 per week because of shaky finances and low enrollment. And this is a trend that's only going to get worse, because America is also staring down the edge of what experts are calling an enrollment cliff. And when it hits, it's going to push many colleges that are already struggling over the edge. So what happened, and how do we get here? First, we need to rewind the clock all the way back to 2008. The world was in chaos. Banks were collapsing, jobs were disappearing overnight, families were losing their homes, and with each passing day, the future felt more and more uncertain. This was the Great Recession, and in times like these, people hold off on making major life decisions. Because when you're worried about your next paycheck, the idea of bringing a child into this world feels like a gamble that you can't afford to take. And so birth rates plummeted, and they never fully recovered. Now fast forward 18 years, and all those kids who were never born, they're the students who aren't showing up to college campuses today. High school graduates in the US are expected to peak in 2025 at about 3.8 million. After that, it's a long downward trend. This decline in future students is what's known as the enrollment cliff, and campus administrators are scrambling to figure out what to do next. Because colleges and universities, they rely on a steady stream of students. Their tuition dollars help cover salaries, amenities, research projects, and any debt the school took on. But when the number of incoming students shrinks, the entire business model starts to crumble. And here's the thing, the enrollment cliff is just the first crack in the foundation of America's higher education system. To see the full picture, we have to look at how do colleges actually make their money. At a high level, it comes down to 3 main buckets. There's tuition, government funding, and endowments. But not every school leans on them the same way. For public universities, a significant source of their revenue often comes from their state governments. That money is supposed to help keep the lights on while also making tuition more affordable for in-state students. But here's where the cracks start to show. State funding for higher education isn't guaranteed. In fact, it's discretionary, meaning that states give what they can when they can. And because funding is directly tied to state tax revenues, if the economy stumbles, higher education budgets are one of the first things to get cut. We've seen this play out before. After the early 2000s downturn, state appropriations for colleges dropped by 14%, but public tuitions, they jumped 12% to cover the gap. And then during the Great Recession, it got worse. Appropriations dropped by 24%, while tuitions skyrocketed by 20%. And when states pull back their appropriations, they don't always return to the old levels of funding. As of 2024, there were still 22 states that haven't returned to the funding levels that they had prior to the Great Recession. Arizona, Iowa, and Delaware were the states furthest from recovery. The pattern is clear. When states pull back, it's the students and their families who get handed the bill. But now you might be thinking, can't colleges fall back on their endowments, the third revenue source? These are essentially giant investment funds made up of donations from alumni, wealthy individuals, and organizations. Schools then invest that money and use the returns to fund things like financial aid and research programs, among other things. We see these endowments in the news, and the size of some of these funds is no joke. Harvard's is bigger than the GDP of over 100 nations. In total, it's estimated that college endowments held over $870 billion in assets in 2024. So at first glance, it seems obvious. If colleges are strapped for cash, why not tap into some of these assets? Well, it's because most of that wealth is concentrated at the top. Just 25 schools hold over half of all endowment assets. For most colleges, their slice of the pie is shockingly small. Nearly 60% of colleges either don't have endowments or have one that's worth less than $50 million, which still seems like a massive number until you see there's strict limits on how much of those funds schools actually can use in a given year. These funds are designed to support the school not just today, but 100 years from now too, which means schools typically withdraw only about 4 to 5% of it per year. And to make matters worse, donors can restrict how their donations are used. So some may only want them to be used for scholarships, others for research programs. A school's hands could be tied if it needs to use those funds to help cover its budget. In the end, these endowments are significant assets, but only to a small number of schools. For most colleges, they're just a modest addition to their annual budgets. So even though colleges technically have access to multiple revenue streams, they have very little control over most of them. And when state budgets shrink or endowments aren't enough, they're left with the one lever they can actually pull, and that's raising tuition. Which means that as the enrollment cliff approaches, that competition for students and their tuition dollars is going to be felt across all schools, big and small, private and public, because at the end of the day, no school can afford to lose its tuition revenue. But this crisis won't hit every college the same way. Some schools are in a better position to handle it than others. Take the Ivy League and big-name research universities. Harvard, Stanford, MIT. These names are recognized around the world and they scream prestige. They open doors and they look good on a resume. Their reputation alone is enough to keep demand strong, which is why these schools have acceptance rates of less than 10%. They're not the ones who are going to be hurting for applicants. But prestige isn't the only competitive advantage. If you look at the big sports schools, you'll see they have something just as powerful. They're loyal fans. Every time a college game is on TV, millions of people tune in to watch the teams play. And some of those people are future students, and the schools are advertising to them every single weekend they're playing on TV. That kind of recognition and pride isn't something that you can buy. In the smaller colleges, they can't replicate it. Which leaves us with the schools caught in the middle, the small regional colleges. Especially those schools who have fewer than 3,000 students and who rely on high acceptance rates. For these colleges, tuition is their lifeline. It makes up about 70% of their annual budgets. And these schools don't have the endowments, the brand, or the fan base of the larger schools, which means being short even a few dozen students could be enough to push them over the edge. And when a college does close its doors, it's the entire community who feels the shock. Some of these schools that close have been around for over 100 years. They were more than just a place to get an education, they were an economic engine, and very often they were the largest employer in the surrounding area. Colleges have their own faculty, staff, and maintenance crews, and even the smaller universities can employ hundreds of people. When those schools close, all those individuals have to find new employment. But it doesn't stop there. Think about the local businesses who depended on students. The restaurants, the bookstores, the coffee shops. That traffic is what kept them going. So when campuses close down, it's like pulling the plug on the entire community. But the ones who get hit the worst are the students, because they're the ones left picking up the pieces. Some of them might qualify for federal loan forgiveness through something called a closed school discharge. But that usually applies only if they were enrolled students at the time the school closed its doors. If they already graduated or if they dropped out earlier, usually they're out of luck. And if they borrowed from a private lender, then forget it. Whether or not they get any relief depends entirely on the lender, and most don't offer much. Trying to continue their education isn't easy either. When students transfer to a new college, they often find that not all their credits transfer with them, meaning that they might have to retake classes that they've already taken, losing more money, time, and momentum. But here's the worst part. Most students don't go back. Less than half of students from closed colleges end up re-enrolling elsewhere. And of those who do, only about a third ever finish their degree. For many students, the school doesn't just shut down their education, it shuts down their entire future. But colleges aren't going down without a fight. The smaller schools are lowering the bar to get in, because when there's fewer students, they can't afford to be picky and turn them away. Outside of the elite schools, most colleges are already accepting the majority of students who apply. And to sweeten the deal, they're slashing the sticker price of their tuition to better reflect what students actually pay on their tuition after scholarships and discounts. This is all about attracting the students and the families who are hesitant about college in the first place because of the price. And little by little, college is turning into a buyer's market with the students holding most of the power. Public schools, though, are playing a different game. They're chasing the out-of-state students. Why? Because they can charge them nearly 3 times as much as in-state students on tuition. In other words, one out-of-state student is worth 3 in-state students. And when even that isn't enough, colleges, both private and public, set their sights overseas. Right now, there are over 1 million international students studying in the US, and they contribute nearly $44 billion to the economy. But for colleges, these students are even more valuable. They pay the higher out-of-state tuition to the public schools, and they usually don't qualify for the need-based financial aid from private schools. The bottom line is that colleges make way more off their international students than they do off their domestic ones, and even the elite universities lean on them. Some of the top schools have international students making up over a quarter of their total student body. But this is a shaky crutch because things like geopolitical tensions and visa crackdowns and competition from overseas schools are already cutting into these numbers. And any kind of disruption, whether that's a new policy or global event, can erode this pipeline of students and leave colleges exposed. Now colleges, they don't want to gamble their future on a market they can't control. But for many of them, it's the only option they have left. So guys, let me know what you think about this video. Did you or someone you know go through a similar situation? I'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoyed the video, leave a like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.